Good morning, students. Now let us continue the next part of the lesson. It's pollination. So you have studied pollination means the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma, and because of that pollination only new varieties of plants, fruits, everything is formed. Okay. So pollination can be of two types, that is cross pollination and self pollination. After the pollination only the fertilization takes place. So process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants involves pollination and fertilization. So pollination also takes place and the fertilization also takes place. In pollination, the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a flower is called as pollination. So this is the definition for the pollination. That means transfer of pollen grains. Yellow color dust powder is called as pollen grains, and that from anther to stigma of a flower is called as pollination. What is the importance of this pollination? It results in fertilization. After the pollination only always the fertilization takes place, which leads to the formation of fruits and seeds. From that only the fruits and seeds can be formed. No varieties of plants are formed through new combination of genes in case of cross pollination. In case of cross pollination, new types of genes cannot be formed. Now types of pollination: self pollination and cross pollination. Self pollination. Self pollination is also known as autogamy. That means self pollination means that pollination takes place in the same plant, and that is called as autogamy. The transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of same flower or another flower born on the same plant. The pollen grains will fall on the same plant or same flower, or sometimes it fall on the same plant, same flower. So that is called as self pollination, and it takes place, example, in hibiscus. Advantages of self pollination. Self pollination is possible in certain bisexual flowers. Bisexual flowers means both male and female will be found in the same flower, both are in the same. Flowers do not depend on agents for pollination. Flowers will not depend on the agents of pollination. There is no wastage of pollen grains. There is no wastage of pollen grains means there is no pollen grains. Wastage of pollen grains will never take place. So these are the advantages of the self pollination, because when a wind blows or when an insect comes from one flower to the another flower of the same plant, it falls on the same flower or to the another flower of the same plant, the pollen grains will not be wasted, it will be falling to the next flower. So that is known as self pollination. So these are the advantages of self pollination. And the next one is what are the disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of the self pollination? The seeds are less in numbers. The seeds will be very less in numbers. The endosperm is minute. Endosperm means the inner part of the, from where the seeds get the food to develop itself, is called as the endosperm. Therefore the seeds produce the weak plants. The enough so it will endosperm is minute, therefore the seeds produce weak plants. Only weak plants will be produced. New varieties of plants cannot be produced. New varieties of plants also will not be produced. Cross pollination. Cross pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of a flower to the stigma of a flower on another plant of the same species. That means if a hibiscus plant is there, then the another one hibiscus plant is there, that means the flowers, pollen grains of the one, that flower will falling into the next hibiscus plant's flower. So that is called as cross pollination. Hibiscus flowers pollen grains will fall and get fertilized only in the hibiscus with the same species. It will, if it falls on the other species also, it will not get fertilized. So that is known as cross pollination. Now what are the advantages of the cross pollinations? So we will first mark the what is the definition for cross pollination, and they have given the examples of cross pollination in apples, grapes, plums, etc. Now advantages of cross pollination. The seeds produced as a result of cross pollination develop and germinate germinate properly and grow into better plants, because the new varieties of hybrid varieties are there. New healthy plants will get and new good characters will get. That is, cross pollination lead to the production of the new varieties. More viable seeds are produced, more healthy seeds are produced. Disadvantages of cross pollination: pollination may be failed due to distance barrier. Sometimes because of the distance, the pollen grains cannot travel by wind. Because of that distance also, it will be having the barriers to carry these pollen grains. More wastage of pollen grains. Pollen grains wastage also takes place. It may introduce some unwanted characters. So some unwanted characters also will be developed. Flowers depend on the external agencies for pollination. Flowers also will depend on the external agencies. That means the insects, birds, that all external agents, also water, that all types of agents they have to depend. So these are the advantages, disadvantages of the pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now what are the agents of cross-pollination? How this agents, what are the other type of things through which the pollination takes place? In order to bring out cross pollination, it is necessary that the pollen grain should be carried from one flower to another different plant. So it should be carried from one flower to another different plant. That is called as that are the agents of cross pollination. And the first one is the pollination by wind. It can take place by animals. What are the different agents of pollination? It can be animals, insects, wind and water. So 4 methods they have shown: animals, insects, wind and water. Now let us go first for the wind. The pollination with the help of wind is called as anemophily. So what is anemophily? The pollination that takes place with the help of the wind. That type of pollen grains will be very light in weight. If it is very light in weight only, it can be when the wind blows, it can be carried by the wind. If it is the heavy pollen grains, it will not be able to be carried by the wind. So the anemophilous flowers produce enormous amount of pollen grains. Enormous means too many amounts, infinite number of pollen grains will be there. The pollen grains are small, smooth, dry and light in weight. You yourself think and see, if it is very heavy in weight, the wind cannot carry it. So it will be very light, dry, smooth, and then only it can be carried by the wind. Pollen such as plants are blown off at distance of more than 1000 kilometers. The stigmas are comparatively large, protruding and sometimes hairy to trap the pollen grains. So when it is carried away by the wind, what will happen? The stigma also of the same hybrid plant, it will be also very big and it will be protruding up. It will be bulged out or peeping outside. So why? Because then only this pollen grains by the wind, when it is carried, it will fall on that all and it gets pollinated. Example, grasses and some cacti. Next comes the pollination by insects. So pollination with the help of the insects like honeybees, bees, flies, etc. are called as entomophily. So anemophily is by wind, entomophily is by insects. To attract insects, these flowers are brightly colored. If the insects are to be attracted, it should be brightly colored. Have smell and nectar. It must have the smell also, and the good smell should be there, and nectar also should be there. The pollen grains are larger in size. The exine is pitted, spiny, etc. So they can be added firmly on the sticky stigma. So it should be spiny also. Exine is pitted and spiny. Spiny means the small thorn like things should be there. Then only if the pollen grains fly, it will fall on that and it will get sticked on this stigma. Approximately 80% of the pollination is done by the insects, is carried by the honeybees. So honeybees are the main agents which carry the pollen grains in the most of the 80% of the plants. So next comes the pollination by water. The pollination with the help of water is called as hydrophily. So the pollination with the help of water is called as hydrophily. This takes place in aquatic plants. Pollen grains are produced in large numbers. So pollen grains will be produced in a very big number. Pollen grains float on the surface of water till they land on the stigma of female flowers. And pollen grains should on the surface of the water and they land on the stigma of the female flowers. Example, hydrilla and Vallisneria. So the pollination taking by the wind, by water, is called as by in the hydrilla and Vallisneria. These all plants grow in the water surface, and their stigmas will be on the top of the water, so that it will be easily get pollinated. Now next comes the what all the pollination, what are the agents? Wind over, insects over, and water over. And now next comes the by animals. So pollination by animals. When pollination takes place with the help of animals, it is called as zoophily. We have studied already. The study of animals is called as zoology. So it is very easy to remember. Pollination by animal is always called as zoo. Zoo word means zoophily. So you can remember easily. Flowers of such plants attract animals by their bright color, size, scent, etc. So for insects also, for animals also, it need the bright color, then only it will get attracted, and the nice smell also must be there. Example, sunbird pollinates flowers of canna, gladioli, etc. Squirrels pollinate flowers of silk cotton here. So silk cotton flowers the plant is get by the pollinated by the squirrels. So these are the different methods. What are the different types of pollination, and what are the pollinating agents that we went through this. And the next class we'll go through what is how the pollination takes place in flowers, or how the after the pollination how the fertilization takes place in plants. So that we will continue in the next class. Thank you, students.